Step into the captivating world of the Behind the Curtain podcast, where your dynamic hosts, John Dyer and Dr. Mohamed Saleh, bring together a wealth of 60 years of combined experience in healthcare and manufacturing. Join us every week as we delve into intriguing topics, weaving unscripted conversations that promise to take you on an unpredictable and enlightening journey. Gain valuable insights for your continuous improvement adventure as we navigate uncharted territories with enthusiasm and expertise. Welcome to a podcast that goes beyond the ordinary, unraveling the mysteries behind the curtain of knowledge.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Behind the Curtain. I'm one of your hosts, John Dyer, and with me is my co-host, Dr. Mohamed Saleh. And we're here to continue our discussion about the size of the organization and how that impacts your continuous improvement efforts. This is part 2. Our last episode, we covered 3 different aspects of size, and that age-old question about, does size matter? The first thing we talked about was how scale magnifies complexity, and how the larger the organization, the more layers there are, the more bureaucracy that can get in the way. The more opportunities for silos to form around the various functions, the more people who are competing for promotions within that organization, and how that can drive a lot of anxiety between the leaders. So scale does magnify complexity. We also talked about how the decision-making can be impacted by the size. Smaller organizations can make faster decisions, not have nearly as much bureaucracy, whereas the larger organizations might tend to be slow in their decision-making process. And then the third topic we talked about last time was the visibility at the Gemba, how with a larger organization, it might be more difficult for the middle managers and the top executives to find their way to the shop floor and actually spend time walking and seeing the process, walking the Gemba. So today we have 3 more aspects of size that can contribute to the success or failure of team-based continuous improvement. So Dr. Mohamed, how about sharing with us the next discussion point?
This is great. And, as we talk about these intrinsic factors, because people say, we did lean here, we could just copy and paste it here. And, how we feel about copying and pasting, context is everything. But size does matter. And so one of the things that I think is significant when it comes to size, as you go through any transformation in an organization, is the access to resources. I've done things, the majority of my career in big organizations, but I've had the opportunity to do it in smaller organizations. And I could tell you that it definitely plays a significant role. If you're ever trying to do a Kaizen, for example, in a large organizations, you're able to pull multiple people and still be able to have a successful production going because there's so many resources that you could pull from. This department has, 20 quality people. So when you pull one out, it's not detrimental, versus a small organization. When you pull one quality person, they might be the only quality person. And so it does hinder a lot of the ability to be able to carve out 4 or 5 days, run a full Kaizen event, or have any kind of events really. So I would say access to resources is a significant issue that I've encountered.
Yeah, I've worked with all different size organizations in my career, and with smaller organizations, you have to get very creative, right? I mean, I've taught classes on Saturdays where they just paid all the workers to come in on overtime. I've done Kaizen events at 11 o'clock at night where They, had people working a split shift and could only come in at a certain time. So yeah, you've got to be a lot more creative with a smaller organization, and sometimes that means taking time, extending an event. Like for a Kaizen event, instead of having 3 full day events, you might only be able to afford to do 2 hours a day for 2 or 3
Little
weeks.
little blitzes, break them down into
Yeah,
blitzes. Yeah.
exactly. Because that's all they can afford to have those folks out. So yeah, it's a much more difficult thing to deal with a smaller organization. Where you're right, with a large organization, it's like, yeah, they just shuffle a few people around, and all of a sudden, 10 people are freed up to do a Kaizen event.
Yeah. And you'll see it a lot when people are presenting on their lean journey, and they'll talk about having this cadence of like, 1 week carved out per month to have this cadence of Kaizens. And people in the crowd asking, like, how do you pull that off? Don't you have resource issues? And again, we're trying to assume all organizations are equal, and they're not. Some of these people have a lot of resources, a lot of tools, a lot of talent in the organization that they could pull from. Small organizations, like you said, have to be creative. Sometimes even overproducing for a week to make up for pulling people off for the other week.
And the critical part of all that is that the leaders have to understand how important these things are, right? In order to make that kind of investment, to do the things you're talking about, paying for overtime or building product up ahead of time. I mean, there's a cost to that.
Yeah.
And if you're a small organization, especially a mom and pop, that's coming directly out of their pocket. But in Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, habit number 7 that doesn't get a lot of play but is critically important is the sharpen the saw.
Mhm.
And and that applies to what we're talking about here as well, is that if you've got a process that is performing very poorly and you're just repeating the same problems over and over and over again,
Mhm.
you need to take the time to sharpen the saw. In other words, take the time to step back, fix the process, even if that means, delaying production for a while in order to get those problems worked out. And then, boom, you can then run much smoother going forward, much more repeatable and consistent. Um, and things, are so much better in the future.
Oh, well said. Yep, absolutely. The other point that I think is aligned to access to resources, I would say is I'll use the word cultural agility, momentum, inertia. Um, I don't know if our listeners ever had to encounter this, but when you're working in big organizations and then move to a smaller organization or vice versa, there's this shock that you run into with cultural agility. Because at least from my experience, bigger organizations often have a lot more red tape. And so where smaller organizations have a lot more freedom to experiment and pivot because they're small, you don't have to move the Titanic. And so there's a lot of agility that comes with that. Now, if the smaller organizations are not 100% committed, it has the opposite effect, the mom and pop effect, where it's like, you know what, it's unless you convince those individuals, nothing could change because there's such a small group. However, in a big organization, even if there's pockets of the leadership team that's not 100% bought in, but there's enough other leaders that are, the inertia and the momentum forces the whole thing to change. So I think there's pros and cons to both when it comes to momentum and cultural agility. But the biggest one that is usually a shell shock for me, at least, has been the red tape and the freedom to be able to pivot.
Yeah, no, with a small organization, yeah, if the owner
Mm.
gets the religion, if you will, of
Mhm.
continuous improvement,
Mhm.
then there's no stopping them, right? There,
Yeah.
it'll be like, because people don't think that owner's going to change anytime soon. It's not like a revolving door at the top. There, that owner's going to be there for a while. And I
Yep.
tell you, when you go to conferences, it is interesting. It seems like a lot of the keynote speakers fit into that category.
Hmm.
They're owners of small to mid-sized companies that saw the light, that really got into this, and basically transformed their whole organization. And they're just knocking it out of the ballpark because of that. And they tend to be, very passionate, and then are good keynote speakers. Where with a large organization, and I've seen this play out many, many times, even if someone very high up, even if the CEO kind of, is the main driver of all of this, I've seen so many mid-level managers that just say things like, they're going to be gone in a year or two. All I have to do is wait this out. I'll pretend like I'm doing some things. I'll say the right words. I'll show the right kinds of data. But as soon as this person who's passionate about this moves on, we'll go right back to the way things were. So there's really no need to change.
Yeah.
Um, and that happens frequently.
Yeah.
And I tell you, what's sad is that in a lot of those cases, the top person may think things are going great. May think that, man, the culture is really changing, whereas it's just all fakery, and it reverts back very quickly after that person leaves.
That's a really good point. You just triggered something that I think also fits in this discussion on cultural agility. And you know, in smaller companies, I've seen this firsthand. There's so many, what is it called? I'll call them informal channels, um, where people just get things done. And back to the red tape that we talked about is in large organizations, sometimes it's red tape, but sometimes it's also change fatigue. In large organizations, we tend to, or I tend to at least witness organizations throw many initiatives at it. Because for them to move the Titanic, they need 50 initiatives where they can't really focus on one. So it's not the vital few, it's the vital many that happen, and the organization gets exhausted from it. And so I think there's also this change fatigue that happens in a large organization, which also is coupled sometimes with poor communication and poor coordination, let's call it that, that makes the inertia or the momentum to actually move or create cultural agility a little bit more difficult.
Yeah, that's a great point. And add to that, flavor of the month issues, right?
Yeah.
That boy, that's extraordinarily frustrating when the top person, the CEO of the company, let's say, is constantly reading books. That's tough, right? And so, like this month or this quarter, it's all about
Yes.
going to the Gemba, because I
Yeah.
read a book on going to the Gemba. And then, the next quarter, it's all about, kata, scientific thinking. We got to do more kata. Then the next quarter, oh, they happen to read a book on Six Sigma. Okay, we're going to start doing Six Sigma.
Yeah.
And you never get any momentum. You never get any traction.
The
And after
roots.
a while, the organization learns, like I said, it's just, all right, all we have to do is wait it out, because the flavor is going to change for the next quarter.
That's a good point. Yeah, I see that a lot. That kind of brings us to the third bullet, which fits a little bit with access to resources, but I think it's a different bullet that I see in the sizes of organizations that play a role is bandwidth, leadership bandwidth. And that I would also couple almost span of control into that as well. In larger organizations, senior leaders, there's multiple levels and layers, like we talked about in the last episode. And so not all the levels have the same capabilities, or they shouldn't have the same capabilities. But sometimes what happens is we promote leaders that now are now in a new level that don't have that capability. And so they tend to migrate down to the middle level, and take on almost double the bandwidth because they're trying to do the middle manager's job and which becomes micromanaging to some degree. And then they are still responsible for their new role. And so in larger organizations, you see people saying, I come in at 5 a.m. and I work, nights and weekends and stuff like that. And so I see bandwidth playing a big role. In small organizations, there's more of a tighter leadership circle. And so quicker collaboration, the culture setting is just different.
Right. Right. Yeah. Um, think of it in terms of this, right? And I've seen this play out many, many times. We've talked several times on this podcast about how people tend to get promoted, right? The old way of thinking that's been passed down from generation to generation is that the people that uh, get promoted are those that shine the brightest themselves, not the teams, not the people that they're coaching, but themselves. So what does that mean? That means they've got to be really good firefighters in order to make themselves stand out. They got to be in command and control mode all the time, telling people what to do, how to do it, right? In order so that they can then take credit for when things happen. And those are the people that tend to, show the brightest and then get recognized by the middle managers and the executives, and then boom, they get promoted. Well, think about that as it relates to, say, manufacturing scenario where someone is overseeing a plant manager, right? And I've had this happen where in this particular case, the plant manager was so command and control that no one could make a decision without their direct involvement or approval, even to the smallest detail. Like, you were not allowed to move furniture around your office without this person's permission. I mean, that's how command and control this person was. And they got promoted because, again, people did not care to work for this person, but they got promoted because they were recognized the most by the middle and upper leaders. So all of a sudden, this person had responsibility for several plants, right? Well, they became the bottleneck for the decision-making process because they kept that same mindset of command and control when they went up into the next layer of the leadership, and the plants weren't allowed to do anything without this person's direct approval.
Mhm.
Well, this person couldn't be in 5 different plants at the same time. So what he would do is go from plant to plant, and that was the only time when that plant could actually make any changes or do anything. Um, so it became unwieldy.
Bureaucracy. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it was huge bureaucracy, and
Yeah.
the all 5 plants started to really suffer because of that, and it was purely because this person. We talk about bottlenecks in manufacturing. This person became the bottleneck for decision making.
Yeah,
Um,
as you were talking about that, I was thinking of the opposite of that too. In that same scenario, that same example, I could see that we there's one of my senseis, his name is Mark DeLuzio. He always talks about lean not being a spectator sport. And it almost has that effect as well, where that individual could delegate transformation or some kind of organizational lever, such as lean, um, and delegate it away. So he could tell each of those sites, I want you guys to do lean. And what happens is this dilution of intent happens, where he might actually be extremely not a micromanager, hands off, but he could be too hands off to the point where he's delegated away the responsibility. and that other person could then delegate it to someone else. And it's like, okay. And then at one point, you don't know who's really the responsible person for this change because everyone's kind of delegating it to someone else.
Right. And that's why, we discussed this 2 or 3 podcasts ago. That's why we need to start thinking of leaders as coaches.
Yeah.
Right. Because if I'm a good coach in a single plant environment where I'm developing my leadership team and then coaching them, which means you don't just, delegate and then forget. No, you're there with them. You're mentoring, you're teaching, you're providing the vision of where you're headed. You're helping knock down roadblocks as they occur, so the team can be successful. Well, the best coaches then get promoted. Now, if I'm coaching, say 5 different plants, well, I'm going to develop a strong team around me, which includes those 5 individual plant leaders, and coach them, start mentoring them, providing that vision, helping them knock roadblocks down. Which means, yeah, occasionally going and going to a Kaizen event or going to the Gemba in that particular plant. One time I got to talk to the head of operations for all of North America for Toyota. And one of the things I asked him was, how do you keep lean fresh? Toyota's been doing this forever. How do you keep it fresh? And he shared with me that every person in the company had to do a Kaizen event, a 1-week Kaizen event every year. It was part of their performance review, as part of their DNA, basically. And he had no idea what plant he was going to be assigned to, but he would then show up at that plant for 1 week. Even though he's head of all of operations for North America, he would be at that plant for a week as a Kaizen participant, no more, no less than any other member of that team. And then everyone's boss was expected to attend the report out at the end of the week where the team shared what they had accomplished.
Yeah.
So his boss, which was basically the head of Toyota for all of North America, the CEO for North America, would attend that Kaizen event for the report out. So again, built into their DNA, into their calendar was this, hey, no matter what role you have, you're going to spend time at the Gemba doing a Kaizen event every year.
Yeah, that would reduce the dilution of intent when it comes to bandwidth. So at this point, we talked about a lot of things when it comes to the size of an organization, and hopefully our listeners are walking away with this noticing that size does shape both our systems and cultures. And so as you're observing an organization and trying to replicate some of these wins, pay attention to the size because it plays a significant role. We talked today about access to resources. We talked about cultural agility. We talked about leadership bandwidth, and dabbled a little bit in how the saturation or change diffusion happens within that. And that kind of couples to what we talked about last week around how scale magnifies complexity, the importance of decision making, speed versus bureaucracy, and the visibility and the distance from the Gemba, and how that plays a role as well. And these are all factors when it comes to size. And so size does matter. And I think people need to be a little bit more mindful of it when they're going into an organization or in an organization that's changing, to understand the context of what they're in.
All right. Very good. Well, we will see you at our next podcast. So thanks everybody for joining us.
Thanks everyone. Take care.
As we draw the curtains on another fascinating episode, we wanted to express our gratitude for joining us on this enlightening journey. If you're hungry for more captivating and thought-provoking discussions with John Dyer and Dr. Mohamed Saleh, hit that subscribe button to ensure you don't miss a beat. Until next week, keep exploring, stay inquisitive, and stay inspired. See you on the next Behind the Curtain adventure.